The French invaders. In this episode of French Invaders, we are delighted to speak with John Kiarakou. John is a former senior CIA officer. He was recruited in the agency straight out of college as an analyst and then moved on to the operations side of the agency, where he led, among others, counter-terrorism operations in Pakistan. He rose to the rank of Assistant Deputy Director for Counter-Terrorism until his resignation in 2004. He is the one who blew the whistle on the CIA's secret torture program and was prosecuted by the Obama administration for a breach of the Espionage Act. In light of what has been revealed since the inauguration of President Trump, we'll be discussing, of course, the CIA, but also USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, and all institutions that were instrumental to maintaining the US hegemony for the past 30 years. John Kiarakou, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Just to start the conversation, what's your take on what has been going on since January the 20th this year?
I have to admit to you that when I wake up in the morning and look at the Washington Post and the New York Times, I'm usually in a state of disbelief. It's amazing to me what is happening in this country so quickly. For example, today we're speaking on the 13th of February, and the headline on the Washington Post is about how there are going to be massive layoffs among the federal workforce. The federal workforce hasn't had layoffs since 1977. We're in really uncharted territory in the last, 2 generations. And we don't really know who's in charge in Washington. Is it Elon Musk, who's not an elected official of any kind? Is it Donald Trump? And what is the end game? And that's just domestically. In foreign affairs, the other highlight, headline is that Israel is planning to attack Iran, but can only do so with U.S. help, which makes me wonder if Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump have already had that conversation, and the United States is prepared to go to war, but the American people don't know it yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's been quite a ride since January 20th, and I must say, I mean, I'm torn like you, although I must say what I see is quite extraordinary on another end. I mean, and just the fact that Tulsi Gabbard was confirmed yesterday
Right.
for national intelligence, such a great news. Apparently, RFK Jr. is pretty much assured not to be confirmed very soon. So it's a lot of change. It's actually difficult to process. My wife calls Trump Santa Trump now, because every day we receive some news which are actually quite encouraging. But as I think you're right to point the dark aspect of the foreign affairs announcement, including the Gaza one and the noise of boots on the ground again in the Middle East, particularly going into a conflict with Iran. It's Pascal back online. Otherwise, I'll continue.
Yes, I am.
Okay, Pascal. So.
Okay, so could you please also tell us about your tour de force? That was the arrest of Abu Zubaydah.
Oh, certainly. Oh, wow. It's a long story, but I'll make it short. I was stationed in Islamabad, Pakistan at the very start of 2002. In January of 2002, I went to Pakistan as the head of counterterrorism operations for the CIA. And we started off just trying to hit one Al-Qaeda safe house at a time, one a night. We would grab one fighter, two fighters, and just take them to the Rawalpindi jail. After I had been there about 6 weeks, we got word that Abu Zubaydah was somewhere in the country. And at the time, at the CIA, we believed that Abu Zubaydah was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. And so we came up with a plan to try to capture him with the help of a CIA targeting analyst. But the targeting analyst was not able to pinpoint Abu Zubaydah's location to any fewer than 14 sites. 13 of them ended up being actual potential locations. One was a payphone. So in one night, in late March of 2022, a team of CIA, FBI, and Pakistani ISI officers struck all 13 sites simultaneously. At one of those sites, Abu Zubaydah, a Syrian bomber, and Abu Zubaydah's bodyguard tried to jump from the roof of the house to the roof of the neighboring house. They were shot by a Pakistani policeman, and we caught him. So I received direct orders from headquarters, from the director of the CIA, George Tenet, to remain by his bedside. We flew him to a Pakistani military hospital about an hour away from where we found him in Faisalabad, Pakistan. And I sat with him for the next 56 hours until he was finally sent to a secret prison. A CIA plane flew in, and 3 FBI agents and I loaded him onto the plane. He and I talked a great deal while we were waiting for the plane to come in. 56 hours is a long time, especially when you're under very strict orders not to sleep and not to ever leave his bedside. So we talked about the 9/11 attacks. He said he didn't want to attack the United States that day. He wanted to kill Jews, but that he had been overruled. He said that he would never know the touch of a woman. He would never know the joy of fatherhood. And we got into several arguments. I told him, you're not the victim here. There were 50,000 people in those towers. What did you think we were going to do? And I gave him advice. I said, listen, I'm the nicest person you're going to meet in this experience. My colleagues are not nice like I am. And if there's one thing that you do, it's that you have to cooperate. And he said, you seem like a nice man, but you're the enemy, and I'll never cooperate. Well, he actually did cooperate with an FBI agent by the name of Ali Soufan. And Ali Soufan was withdrawn from the secret site and replaced by CIA torturers who immediately began torturing him, almost killed him. They actually stopped his heart from beating, and he had to be revived just so they could torture him more. He went from secret prison to secret prison over the course of 4 years. He went to, I believe it was 6 different sites, and then has been in Guantanamo since 2006.
John, apparently, well, I think your fate and Abu Zubaydah are very, very linked because, in fact, it is what led you to that fateful that interview that which made your life take a turn for the worse with the U.S. authorities in 2007 for ABC. Would you actually have denounced the torture program if you had not had experienced someone you spent very strong, very critical hours with for 56 hours, as you just mentioned? Was the fact that Abu Zubaydah was tortured, really what triggered your will to actually denounce the torture program?
That's a good question. The easy answer is yes. I would have denounced it regardless, but I wouldn't have had a platform. It was only because I was, the capturer of Abu Zubaydah. It was only because I was the first one to sit and to speak with him that it gave me the entree to the American media that I needed to spread the story. I'm ashamed to tell you that of the 14 CIA officers who were asked if they wanted to be trained in the use of the torture techniques, I was the only one who said no. Even after all these years, that so disappoints me that so many of my colleagues were willing to become monsters. I'll tell you, the price was high, but I'm glad I did it, and I would do it again in a moment. I would do it again. On the one hand, I was fortunate that I had that access to the American media back in December of 2007 to say that my government was torturing its prisoners. On the other hand, if I hadn't been involved with the capture of Abu Zubaydah, I don't think anybody would have paid any attention to me if I had gone to the media and criticized torture. And, there's a postscript to this story as well. I've been in touch with Abu Zubaydah's attorney. And at the very end of the Biden administration, it seemed like there was a possibility that he could be released. He's never been charged with a crime. And whatever he said couldn't be used against him in court because it was collected through torture. And so what his attorneys were waiting for was for a country to come forward that was willing to accept him. Well, no country came forward. And now Donald Trump is president. And Donald Trump said that nobody will be released from Guantanamo. Indeed, he's begun sending undocumented refugees to Guantanamo by the plane load. And so I fear that Abu Zubaydah is going to remain at Guantanamo illegally for the next 4 years at least.
I think it's a good transition as well. I mean, to make a transition to something else. There is someone in the Abu Zubaydah story related to you who also played a very strong part, and it's someone who's very much now in the know with the new Trump administration, and that's John Brennan. From what I understand, he is like he is an accuser a little bit like the accusers of Edmond Dantes in the Count of Monte Cristo in your existence. Could you expand on the role that John Brennan played in your drama?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up John Brennan because this is something that most Americans have no idea about. John Brennan was, John and I were at the CIA together through my entire career. I've known John Brennan for 35 years, and I've disliked him for 35 years. John Brennan made a very, very interesting and for him very important political decision in 2007. He retired from the CIA in 2007, and there was a large number of people who retired that year, and about half of them went to the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign to be advisors, and the other half went to the John McCain campaign to be advisors. John Brennan was the only one who went to the Obama campaign. And so when Barack Obama won that election, John was a star, and he became the deputy national security advisor for counter-terrorism, later the CIA director. Well, because Barack Obama was supposed to be a left-of-center Democrat, a progressive Democrat, most Americans just assumed that he appointed other progressive Democrats as his advisors. That's just simply not true. John Brennan has long claimed to be apolitical, not at all interested in politics. In fact, he was very, very conservative, and he was one of the fathers of the torture program. So here, for years, the American media were saying that, well, these torturers, they were all George W. Bush people. No, that's just simply not true. They were George W. Bush people, they were Hillary Clinton people, they were John McCain people, and they were Barack Obama people. And John Brennan happened to be the one who slipped through the cracks and rose to the top, becoming eventually the CIA director in Barack Obama's second term, never had to pay the price for his position on torture. And again, it's something that the American people don't know, but they should know, because they should understand who it is that's representing them in the most important positions in government.
Likewise, if we could jump on the USAID, when you were working for the US Congress, you did witness the funding of irrigation of poppy fields, didn't you, in Afghanistan?
I did. I wanted to do a study.
You too.
I was the.
I did too.
I was the senior investigator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee at the time, and I wanted to do this study on poppy cultivation in Afghanistan. And so I flew to Bagram Air Base, and I was very fortunate in that because I was a senior staff member, I had the rank of brigadier general, the equivalent rank of brigadier general. And so I could just commandeer a helicopter. Mm-hmm. And so I did. And I said, we're going to go to Kandahar, and then we're going to Lashkar Gah in Helmand province in southern Afghanistan. I want to look at the poppy fields. Oh, no. They said, we can't do that. I said, oh, yes, we can do that. So I demanded it. I ordered it. And we flew first to Kandahar and then to Lashkar Gah. Well, when you land in Lashkar Gah, for as far as your eye can see, it's poppy. And so I told my military handlers, I want to go into the poppy fields and I want to interview a poppy farmer. And so I should add that where we landed in Lashkar Gah was something called a PRT. It was an organization run by the State
Provincial
Department.
Reconstruction Teams, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they were not at all happy that I was there, disrupting their work and interfering. They didn't want me there at all, but I insisted. And so we went out, I should say too, the PRT is State Department, it's military, it's USAID, it's a whole bunch of different organizations. So we went out finally into the poppy fields. I had a security team and a translator. I don't speak Pashto. And so we encountered a poppy farmer. And and I asked him very naively, why don't you grow things with 2 growing seasons instead of poppy? You could grow tomatoes or onions or pomegranates. And in a very frustrated tone, he said, the Americans told me in 2001 that if I told them where the Arabs were hiding, I could grow all the poppy I wanted. And I said, what Americans told you could grow poppy? And as soon as I asked the question, my handlers said, the interview's over. Security is at stake. We have to go back to the PRT. I never got an answer. Well, I knew what the answer was. It was clear who was giving the orders in the poppy fields. And so I flew back to the United States, and I said to John Kerry, I developed some very interesting and I think important information. And I told him what the poppy farmer had told me. And Kerry killed the report. The reason being, Afghanistan was producing 93% of the world's heroin, but almost all of that heroin was going to Russia and Iran. And we want them to be addicted to heroin. We want them to have drug problems in their countries because it weakens them and it gives us the leg up. And so I never published that study. Never.
Were you aware that at the same time, the USAID was also running a poppy eradication program whose contract went to DynCorp?
Yes, isn't that funny? DynCorp,
isn't it?
DynCorp ended up essentially running Afghanistan on behalf of the U.S. government.
Yeah, so just I'm sorry to interrupt. Just for listeners, I mean, which maybe both American and French, DynCorp is one of the major defense contractor in the U.S.
It sure is. It employs tens of thousands of people. And, just as an aside, the Washington, D.C. area now has the most millionaires per capita of any place in America. It used to be Silicon Valley, California, with all of the tech companies. It's now the Washington, D.C. area. And it's because of the post 9/11 money that has been spent on so-called national defense. In fact, this defense has just enriched thousands of people here. People have gotten rich by investing in DynCorp and Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin and so many of these other companies
for the development part and people stuff.
Exactly. We're in a permanent wartime economy post 9/11 with trillions of dollars. By one estimate, $23 trillion since 9/11 going into defense contracting. And that's an example of it right there.
Just a little. I find it fascinating just to come back to the Afghanistan and the poppy field and what Kerry told you about the US wanting Russia and Iran to be addicted to heroin. That, that's exactly what the British Empire did in China with opium, which launched the Opium Wars.
The Opium Wars, you're exactly right. And, only a handful of people have brought that up with me when I've told that story. And I mean, over the last, 16 years, history repeats itself. And those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. And that is one example.
At the same time, it's funny because I mean, with my superficial knowledge of Russian and Iranian society, they don't seem like society where you have rampant addiction to heroin. So is it something that
I think it's wishful thinking. Wishful thinking on the part of the American government.
Can we go back now, if that's okay with you, on the history of the CIA, starting in the 1920s and Dulles Council of Foreign Relations? And that led to the creation during World War II of the OSS.
OSS.
And then also social, as used to call it. And then in 1947, the CIA.
Sure. Beginning in the 1920s,
what I'm thinking of is the role of Wall Street in creating the U.S. intelligence civilian U.S. intelligence apparatus, because
that's right, and that's one thing that most Americans have no idea of is that intelligence, the idea of creating an intelligence service, an intelligence agency, began on Wall Street in the 1920s with the Dulles brothers and with Joseph P. Kennedy and with the father and grandfather of President George H.W. Bush. This was very much
the infamous Brown Harriman Bank. Yeah,
that's exactly right. These are important names in American history, especially in American business history. But most Americans don't realize that they were also the ones who, from the 1920s onward, promoted the idea that we needed to have an intelligence service. George Washington, our first president, famously said that gentlemen don't read other gentlemen's mail. And so that's why we never had intelligence collection, not coordinated intelligence collection in this country. But in the 20s, these important, conservative, white, rich businessmen in New York floated the idea. Nothing really came of it officially or formally until the outbreak of the Second World War. And then we created the Office of Strategic Services. Now, the Office of Strategic Services was actually a pretty good idea, because you took American soldiers, or even American civilians who had native level foreign languages. Like, for example, Greek Americans were sent to Greece to pretend to be Greeks and to spy on Nazi troop movements. Similarly, German Jews who spoke German without an accent were sent to Germany, and we did this all over Europe. Well, at the end of it, there was a belief at the White House under President Harry Truman that we needed to formalize this thing. And in 1947, Congress passed something called the National Security Act of 1947, which created the CIA. And it was because, the military was doing its thing, and the Department of the Treasury was doing its thing, and everybody had this little private intelligence collection unit scattered all around government. And Truman wanted to make the whole community centralized. And that's why they called it the Central Intelligence Agency. And the director was the director of Central Intelligence, not the director of the CIA. He was the director of all of the intelligence services around the country. This was very much to the consternation of the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, because Hoover wanted to be in charge of everything having to do with security and intelligence. And that sort of led to the split between the FBI and the CIA. But in 1947, this thing was created. By 1963, Truman, who was long retired, realized he had made a terrible mistake And he said so in an editorial in the Washington Post after John F. Kennedy. Yeah. And the CIA ran out of control until
Dulles
1975.
Flew directly to Missouri, I believe, to meet Truman, demanding that he withdraw this op-ed, didn't he?
That's exactly right. And in fact, the op-ed was not withdrawn, but it was delayed for something like 6 months. Truman wrote it in the immediate aftermath of the Kennedy assassination, and it was held for months just because Dulles was objecting to it.
And the OSS also was capacity built by the British, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. In fact, for all intents and purposes, the OSS was created by the British. In fact, there were British MI6, what is now MI6 officers in both Washington and New York that helped to create the OSS, and that actually consulted with the American government on the creation of the CIA just 2 years later.
Well, one funny also story is the one of James Jesus Angleton, whose mentor was none other than Kim Philby.
You know, that's the funny thing. It's because Angleton was so close to Philby that it made Angleton paranoid to the point where he ruined the lives of many CIA officers, because once he realized he had been duped by Philby, he was the best man in Philby's wedding, and Philby was the best man in his wedding. Once he realized that he had been fooled by Philby all these years and that Philby was actually a KGB agent, he turned his attention to the CIA and accused dozens and dozens of loyal, patriotic CIA officers of being KGB moles. He ruined many lives.
Oh, not only in the CIA, he did that also with the French intelligence service, the SDEC.
That's exactly right.
He did that with the MI6. He did that with the BND. He did that with the SISMI, also in Italy. Pretty nocib guy. But, I mean, you will, I guess, agree that when it comes to intelligence operations, I mean, one of the most potent lever in the MICE acronym is money.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay,
that's exactly right.
So is it fair to say that one of the most potent lever of CIA is a form of corruption? It is.
Oh, it is. It has to be. Just the nature of CIA is to promote corruption.
Okay, all right. So between 1947 and I would say 1975, the Church Commission, most of the corruption abroad was the fact of the CIA. The CIA was its own paymaster. My question is then, is it the Church Commission who prompted the emergence of USAID, which at the onset was doing real development work? I mean, let's face it, to become its paymaster?
No, it happened earlier. There's a letter that has finally been declassified, a letter written by Senator Ted Kennedy in 1973, written to Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and the director of the CIA, asking, is it true that USAID is acting as a cutout for the CIA? And much to everybody's surprise, he received a letter back from Henry Kissinger and an identical letter from the director of the CIA saying, actually, yes, USAID is a cutout for the CIA. And the CIA has used USAID to fund operations in Laos in 1969, 1970, 1971, and 1972. So this is something that predated the Church Commission or Church Committee and has continued to this day. If you look at other declassified documents that you can find at the National Security Archives at George Washington University, you'll see that USAID worked to overthrow the Bolivian government in 2008. They worked to overthrow the Cuban government in 2013. And there were dozens of operations in between. USAID was all over Afghanistan for all those years. So they were supposed to be working to build an electrical grid, to build hospitals, to build schools, to quote unquote promote democracy. And all they did was act as a cutout for the CIA all those years.
Yes. One question I've been burning to ask you is, you started working at the, you were actually recruited into the CIA by one of your former professors at George Washington University, and
yes,
started at the CIA in 1990, and if I remember correctly, your first assignment as an analyst was in Iraq a few months before the invasion of Kuwait. And then you stayed at the CIA until 2004. You resigned after. When you were pretty much at your peak. I think at the time you were deputy director of operations, if I'm correct. When did you think that the whole thing, what led you as a young idealist who wanted to do something, who wanted to embrace a career in the civil service, when did you think that things completely unraveled, that the nature of the US institutions changed to the point that you decided to leave and take a job at Deloitte?
I wanted when I was in graduate school, I wanted nothing more than to enter public service. I come from an immigrant family. All four of my grandparents came from Greece, from the island of Rhodes, and they were all so grateful for what this country had given us. I wanted to pay the country back for what we had received, and so I only considered jobs in public service. And so when my professor recruited me into the CIA, I saw this as a way to offer my thanks to the country, and also a way to see the world. I really wanted to see the world. In retrospect, there was only a very brief time during the Clinton administration when Americans, I think, could really be proud of what the CIA was doing, because they were focused on things like combating AIDS or working against climate change, in addition to trying to keep the country safe. I believed that we really were trying to keep the country safe. That changed after 9/11, and the CIA became little more than a paramilitary organization focused solely on counter-terrorism. And instead of operating within the confines of the law, which, like it or not, that's what you have to do, the CIA just began undertaking criminal actions, like torture programs, like kidnapping programs, like secret prisons based all around the world. And in my mind, that was just wrong. We're supposed to be a nation of laws. We're supposed to be a nation that's governed by a constitution. We can't just pretend that the laws don't apply to us because it's expedient to torture people. And so, once I realized that my own personal ideology is no longer in line with those around me, I realized I had to leave.
So you are an island Greek. I guess that must have felt well with George Tenet, which is supposed to be a Greek-speaking Albanian from the mountains, didn't he?
Well, I'm glad you said it, because if you hadn't said it, I would say it. Yes, George was a Greek-speaking Albanian from the mountains, and he and I had this odd relationship. George never liked me, which was sad because I always liked him, but he didn't like me because my family was from an island, and he believed that island Greeks looked down on mountain Greeks, which is true. I admit that. But I didn't look down on him. He was the director of the CIA. He was my boss. I will say that George surrounded himself with Greek Americans at the CIA, but to a man, every one of them was from the mainland. There were no islanders.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. But before you entered the CIA, you must have known that it has from the get-go, because it was directly stemming from the OSS, because all the good old boys from the OSS went back, or some
That's
of
right.
them never left, like friend Weisner, for instance.
That's exactly right.
You must have known that they engaged into paramilitary operations. I mean, Arbenz, Guatemala, Mossadegh in Iran,
Right.
and so forth. So do you actually mean that once the wall fell, then there was a shift towards becoming really an intelligence gathering and analyze this organization, and
That's
that
right.
paramilitary ops were set aside?
Yes, that's exactly right. When I was considering this CIA job, I was dating a woman who had a friend who worked at the CIA, and she set up a dinner for all of us to get together. And I asked him exactly those kinds of questions. What about Iran and Mossadegh? What about Arbenz? What about the coup in Athens, for heaven's sake, in 1967?
Oh, yes.
And he said, "Oh, those days are long gone." He said, "Now the job of the CIA is really to recruit agents to provide us with intelligence, and then to analyze that intelligence so that our policymakers can make the best informed policy." And I said, what would you do if you were working in your regular job and you saw some classified information that made you doubt the legality of CIA operations? And he said, "I would leave." And that made me comfortable enough that I was willing to move forward. And like I say, through the Clinton administration, there really was what they used to call the peace dividend. We were engaged in warming relations with Russia, for example. We had no real problem with China in the 1990s. There was talk about initiating talks with Iran again. We had a problem with Iraq, certainly, but that was just about it. And I supported American intervention to protect Kurds and Shia Muslims and religious minorities in Iraq. And so I gladly took the job, proudly served through the 1990s. And then, oh boy, did things change on 9/11.
I mean, this change did happen before. I mean, I'm thinking about 1999 and Serbia, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, listen, I'm glad you brought that up too. I was stationed in Greece at the time. Oh, it was just nightmarish because, Greece is an Orthodox Christian country. Serbia is an Orthodox Christian brother, and I'm an Orthodox Christian. And so to go to work every day and to have to defend Bill Clinton's attacks against Serbia, it was just a nightmare. There were demonstrations at the American embassy almost every day. They would smash the windows. They would throw coins to break the windows. They would fire balloons of red paint at the embassy with paint guns. It was just terrible. And then there were attempts on the lives of Americans, official Americans in Athens, just in protest. You're exactly right about Serbia. Bill Clinton was 100% wrong on that issue.
You are talking a lot about the Clinton administration and the fact that it introduced some form of new ways of doing things by promoting some substantive causes. Like, you were mentioning the AIDS epidemic, but you also have a very good article which was published in First Things. It's considered one of the most important article written in 2024 by Nathan Pinkowski on actually existing post-liberalism. And his thesis is, in fact, what was introduced during the Clinton administration was the abolition of what the separation between state and society, which led directly to, you had precisely some programs which were starting to sanction some the entourage of rogue leaders like Milosevic, etc., which then led to sanctions that were directly against the entire country. Started with Libya and Iran, and then it started to sanctions against major power like Russia. And now we are at the same kind of the same absence of separation of state and society led to the whole of society, which actually led into programs of actually surveillance of American citizens, and repression of political opponents by as we have seen during the Biden administration, and mass censorship. And now we are seeing mass promotion of favored media. So don't you think that precisely that what was introduced during the Clinton administration was in fact some kind of slippery slope?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And this is the problem with the lack of congressional oversight. You described this perfectly. It was a very slippery slope. This is another problem with American politicians, is they don't know when to stop. Now we have sanctions on everybody, it seems, to the point where it's my view that the proliferation of American sanctions all around the world is what led to creation of BRICS. For example, sanctions on Russian banking, sanctions on China, sanctions on Iran, sanctions on Venezuela, sanctions every time we don't like somebody's political views on an issue. It made it impossible for trade to take place because by default, every banking transaction goes through New York, even if it's an electronic transaction that is in New York for a tenth of a second, right? Just going from one switching station to another. Well, the establishment of BRICS has changed that. And BRICS, the idea behind BRICS and its financial system is that these transactions don't go through New York. They can go through Shanghai, they can go through Hong Kong, they can go through Moscow, they can go through anywhere and not be subject to sanctions. And I'll tell you how ridiculous sanctions became. When Barack Obama negotiated the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, everybody was happy because it opened trade relations between Iran on the one hand and the UK, France, Germany, Japan, the big Western economies. And then Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA. Well, American law says that if a country is doing business with Iran, that country is subject to sanctions. So are we going to sanction the British, the French, the Germans, the Japanese? Are we going to sanction everybody that's doing business in Iran?
That's what's been done. That's what you're doing, basically.
Yeah, that's what we're doing, which is preposterous, which makes sanctions irrelevant. And that's what spurred these other countries to create their own system, their own trade system that cuts the United States out. So sanctions, so many American politicians believe that sanctions are what make our country strong, that make us powerful in the world economy. In fact, it's sanctions that are weakening us and that will relegate us to simply being a regional power.
And if sanctions were working, basically, Cuba would have experienced regime change for a long time ago.
Exactly. Ask the Cubans about sanctions. They'll tell you everything that you want to know. I went to Cuba last year for the very first time. And certainly sanctions hurt. There are a lot of things that you can't get in Cuba. And it's worse for Cuba because it's not just sanctions, it's an embargo. But I have a friend who's in Iran right now, and Iran is under punishing, crippling sanctions from the United States. And Iran has a vibrant economy. They lack for nothing. There's construction going on all over the place. They have great and close relations, economic relations with Russia, China, India, and much of Europe. It's the United States that's losing out because of these sanctions.
I just wanted to go back as well on what is going on since Trump was inaugurated for a second time, actually, particularly in the field of the intelligence community. We now have seen that Tulsi Gabbard was confirmed yesterday as Director of National Intelligence.
Yes.
One of the first actions Trump took was to strip 51 intelligence officials of their security clearance that included no less than Brennan, whom we already mentioned,
yes.
But also Clapper, Hayden, and many other prominent intelligence officials.
Blinken,
very important.
Yes, Blinken.
Where do you think this is all heading, and do you have any hope that it can lead to something more hopeful, in fact, than the situation we have seen in the past 8 years in particular?
Well, there's the old saying that even a broken clock is right twice a day. I strongly supported Donald Trump's decision to strip these 51 former CIA officials of their security clearances for a number of reasons. First of all, I don't think anybody who is no longer working in government should have a a security clearance unless the security clearance is held by a corporate entity for which you're doing contract work. So if you leave the CIA and you go to DynCorp or you go to Northrop Grumman or something like that, of course, you need your security clearance to do your job. But not when you leave the CIA and you go to one of the news networks. You don't deserve a security clearance. It's expensive to maintain a security clearance. And then you have the likes of John Brennan saying, well, listen to me because I have inside information. And if you could see what I see, then you would know that I'm right. Well, no, that's just propaganda. He's propagandizing the American people. We shouldn't believe what John Brennan says just because John Brennan tells us to trust him. The 51 former CIA officials that you mentioned that signed this letter, attesting to the fact that, or attesting to their position that the Hunter Biden laptop was, their words, it bore all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation operation. It wasn't a Russian disinformation operation. Hunter Biden, the president's son, was a crack addict and a meth addict who frequented prostitutes and documented it and took pictures of it, and it was all on his laptop. That is not a Russian disinformation operation. It's that the president's son is a drug addict. And so they acknowledged, after they were caught, after they had signed this letter, they acknowledged that they did it because Tony Blinken asked them to do it because it would strengthen the Biden campaign during the 2020 presidential race. And so they actively engaged in the propagandization of the American people. That's a crime. It's illegal to do something like that, and they did it anyway. So there should be some punishment that comes with it. They're lucky that they just lost their security clearances and have been banned from federal buildings. Now, is that why Donald Trump did this? Did he do it because it's better for the country? Of course not. He did it for revenge. But I don't care why he did it, because at the end of the day, it was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. But the most important part of Hunter Biden's laptop was about Burisma and the Chinese Chinese energy deals, which unraveled the Biden family hardcore corruption and the little family company of influence peddling, and nothing happens.
Yeah, nothing at all happens because Joe Biden pardoned everybody in his family when he was on his way out of office, and because the Supreme Court ruled in the Trump classified documents case that you cannot prosecute a president for actions taken during his presidency. And so everybody's covered. Nobody's going to be prosecuted. Nobody's going to prison, and the Bidens got away with it.
I have another question about which is related to what is going on since Trump is elected. We are now seeing the formation of what is called some kind of resistance movement against what is perceived as an insurrectional presidency, which is quite exceptional. Led by people like Norm Mason, the lawyer, and it's almost like kind of an attempt to pretend that in fact the people should be concerned about to make the class of civil servants who have been doxing Americans, have been weaponizing the American government against American people, and to transform them into some kind of romantic cause. It's like I find that absolutely incredible, and but at the same time it's quite ominous. So do you think that there is a potentiality for that movement of resistance to actually transform into something more potent, and what do you think will happen in the next few months, apart from the usual lawfare against the incoming administration?
Yeah, it's a shame that we even have this word lawfare. I was a victim of lawfare. Donald Trump was a victim of lawfare. And what frightens me a little bit is that Donald Trump is willing to use lawfare against his own enemies. He could take the high road and not do something like that. But the recent actions by Elon Musk show that, unfortunately, Trump is probably going to do the same kind of thing to his enemies that Barack Obama and Joe Biden did to their enemies. Elon Musk, for example, on the X platform, formerly Twitter, just yesterday exposed the name, the home address, and the telephone number of the daughter of a judge that made a ruling against the Trump administration. That is very, very dangerous. First of all, this woman has nothing to do with a legal decision made by her father. Secondly, there are a lot of crazy people in this country. People who might get in their car with weapons and drive to this woman's house and try to take revenge on her for one reason or another. So I'm worried about lawfare. I'm worried about doxing. I'm worried that people around Donald Trump are doing the same dangerous kinds of payback that we saw under the previous administrations. This is not a partisan issue. Both the Democrats and the Republicans are guilty of it. And we need to get back to the place where we used to be, where lawfare was just something that was not done.
But then again, if there is no punishment for those who misbehaved, to say the least, during the Biden administration, how can the divide be closed within the American society? I mean,
that's a good question.
The problem is that no one is getting held accountable otherwise.
No one.
Peaceful means, I would say.
That's right. No one is being held accountable. This is the system that we've given ourselves. And this is the system that's been upheld by the Supreme Court as recently as, 2 months ago, 3 months ago. I'm not sure what the fix is. I mean, I suppose the fix would be congressional action, but nobody in Congress has the guts to stand up to the administration. So many in Congress believe that their role, their job, is to protect the president when the president is a member of the same party, rather than to be a check on the executive branch. Now we have people voting against their own interests on Capitol Hill just because it supports a president of their party, and it makes us weaker. So to answer your question, I don't have an answer to the question, because we're so far in the wrong direction that it might be we've gone beyond the point of no return.
The swamp, whether we like it or not, and that's also true in Europe, I mean, will have to be drained one way or another. So if you don't, if the Trump administration do not push for that, and even if it's by means of revenge, what will change? Nothing.
No, you're right. Nothing will change. And we do have to drain the swamp. I'm just not sure that it's possible. And listen to it this way, too. I say this all the time, and I think it bears repeating. So many of the senior executives in government, not just at the CIA, but all over government, in what's called the Senior Executive Service, the Senior Intelligence Service, and the Senior Foreign Service. And there's also the Senior Commercial Service. So these are the executive level people in government. They are in those positions for 25, 30, 35 years. And they know that they can outweight presidents. Presidents are in the White House for 4 years or 8 years. Presidents come and go. And these executives know that they're not going anywhere. And so a president wants to drain the swamp. They say, sure, good luck. And 4 years later, the president's gone and the executives are still there. So what do? Do you end the senior service? Do you give a president the legal right to fire civil servants? We have the Civil Service Reform Act, which means you can't fire people unless they commit a crime. So what do? I think we have to have massive layoffs in government if you're going to really change things and drain the swamp. But I don't think we're even headed in that direction.
That's what they're trying to do, at least. Legal they will come into major legal hurdles if they don't pass what is it called? The F statute?
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yes, correct.
To go back to the beginning of that Trump administration, were you surprised, John, the first institution, organization in which they wanted to attract full transparency was USAID. As far I was myself a former consultant of USAID and MCC, and I'm pretty much blacklisted because I did the absolute taboo in the domain, which was to stop to stop some funding actually to some cause which I think were correctly handled. But were you surprised that they started with that aspect of the government?
Oh, I was surprised. Because, the conventional wisdom is that USAID is doing development, it's doing pro-democracy propaganda, and it's doing a lot of the CIA's work. And the fact that they were the first targets was kind of a shock to me. I would have thought that maybe the administration would go after, the Department of Health and Human Services, for example, where there's a lot of waste. Even elements of the Pentagon, where there's a great deal of waste. The Department of Transportation, the Environmental Protection Agency. You would expect that, but especially from Trump. But USAID, it just seemed like such an odd target. Now, in retrospect, that we've watched this play out over the last 3 weeks, it may be because USAID is small enough that it can't really defend itself. It's an easy target, and it Americans have this innate disdain for foreign aid. They hate foreign aid, even though it accounts for only 0.1% of the federal budget. Well, now this is a way for Donald Trump to say, see, I did away with that wasteful foreign aid. Aren't you proud of me?
At the same time, I must say I have been surprised as well about what we discovered about USAID. I had no idea that it was actually funding, for example, some press agencies in Western Europe. I mean, I knew it was involved in Eastern and Central Europe, but in Western Europe, I had strictly no idea how many important Western institutions were relying on USAID. Even the Norwegian Refugee Services was apparently, has stopped its operations because of the USAID freeze. It is incredible. I knew it was tentacular, but to that point, I must say it has been quite a surprise. So, were you as surprised as me?
No. This is exactly why USAID was established. USAID and the so-called what do they call it? The National Endowment for Democracy. It's just a front to launder money for the CIA. Even in Western Europe, why would we be spending money on media in Western Europe? That should all be overt. We should be able to go from one government to the other government and say, hey, we would appreciate it if you would do this. Because 99% of the time they would do it. Why do it through USAID? It just makes no sense.
Well, it's been going on since the end of Second World War. I mean, with Operation Mockingbird, we're going back to French Wisner, basically.
That's right.
About that. So it's always been the case. And I found a very funny, a couple of years ago, a very funny declassified wire from the State Department when you had a diplomat in Paris complaining that he had to pay French socialists so that they would make de Gaulle's life miserable in 1961. After he was ordered to pay the socialists to let de Gaulle off in 1958. It's been going on for ages. And we see that currently in Europe because, believe me, I don't think from the US you have an idea of the sheer panic.
That's absolutely right.
That I've seen these people. I mean, it's both hilarious and pathetic. Anyway.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And gentlemen, I beg your forgiveness, but I have another interview that starts in less than 2 minutes.
No problem, John. I mean, that was perfect. I think we covered everything we wanted to cover with you.
I'm so glad. Well, it was a pleasure. Let's do it again sometime.
Okay. Thank you so much, John.
Great.
Thank you. Good to talk to you both.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.
The French invaders